So I'll just leave it to you then.
Okay, so I will share my PowerPoint. Okay, so I just want to, again, I'm going to give you a little brief talk about the social lives of sharks. Now, what do I mean when I talk about social animals? So social animals are just essentially animals that like to spend time with other individuals. And you see this across animals. You can see it in fish, you can see it in mammals, you can see it in birds, insects. It's quite common to find social animals. Now, why are animals social? Well, there can be a variety of reasons. So, for example, it could be for defensive reasons. You may be more likely to see a predator if you're in a group. It could be for hunting reasons. You may be better at catching prey if you're in a group. Or it could be related to mating and reproduction. For example, you might be able to take better care of your young and offspring if you are in a group. So there's a variety of reasons. But most people don't think of sharks as being social. In fact, that's kind of the opposite image that we've had of them for the last several decades. But there's a variety of reasons why we now are starting to see that they could be social. Now, first of all, we've known for a long time that sharks are capable of learning. So a famous scientist, Eugenie Clark, in the 60s was able to perform some pretty cool experiments where she was able to show that lemon sharks could be trained to identify certain shapes and know that those, if they were to press, for example, a target, they would get a food reward. So they can learn. Now, being able to learn doesn't mean you're going to be social, but more recent experiments have shown that they can actually learn by watching other sharks. So some studies done with juvenile lemon sharks showed that they could actually learn to perform tasks just by watching other individual sharks, what we call social learning. We also know that some sharks can have body language. So back in the 70s, divers in the Marshall Islands were getting bitten by grey reef sharks. And just before they were getting bitten, they would notice that these sharks were performing this pretty strange behavior where they would arch their back and they would drop their pectoral fins. They would start to swim in kind of a spiral fashion. We now know that what these sharks were doing was they were essentially giving these divers a warning. They weren't biting the divers because they wanted to eat them. It was down to the fact they were actually scared. It was an anti-predation warning to the divers that they were feeling threatened and they wanted them to back off. And obviously at the time, the divers didn't know what this meant and they didn't back off, and so they were getting bitten. But now we have a better understanding that these animals were actually using body language. Now, whether or not they use that amongst themselves is still kind of unclear. So some of the questions that are of interest to us are, first of all, do sharks form social bonds with other sharks? And if they do, why? So do they like to spend time with other individuals? And I think this picture kind of highlights some of the patterns we're looking for. So this is taken off an island off of Mexico, and you can see these white-tipped reef sharks lying on the ledge. And you can see that they have a lot of space available to them on this ledge, but they're all crowding together. So it suggests that they are actually wanting to hang around and spend time with each other for whatever reason that may be. So how can we measure social behavior of animals in the wild? Well, it's not easy to do, but I'm going to use examples of ourselves, humans. Obviously, we're social animals as well. So if I wanted to understand the social dynamics of humans, like all of you listening to me now, how would I do that? Well, one way I could do that is to try and keep track of how much time you spend with other individuals, how much time and how frequently you spend time with other individuals. And I can use that to get some idea of how strong a bond you have with other individuals. So for example, with your friends or family, you probably spend a lot of time with them and you frequently spend time with them because the social bond you have is quite strong. With other individuals, you may know them a little bit, but not that well. You might just spend small amounts of time. So we can use similar approach to try to understand and map the social dynamics of animals in the wild. And that also requires using a bit of mathematics because we want to make sure that we don't include time spent with individuals just due to random occurrence. So for example, you may go to the store and spend time with an individual who's just in the line for the counter. So it's not because you know that individual, it's not because you have a social bond with that individual, you just both happen to be in the same place because there's a resource there, in this case, the counter. So we want to get rid of those random occurrences, and we can use math to do that. So I'll give you an example of this. A colleague of mine studied the social networks of black-tip reef sharks in French Polynesia, and he was able to basically attract sharks and take pictures of them And he could identify individuals by looking at the patterns of markings on their fin, in the same way we can identify humans from their fingerprints. And so he would basically take pictures and see how often would two individual sharks turn up at the same time, assuming that the more time they would turn up together, the stronger the bond between those individuals. And he was able to do that and produce images like the one I'm showing here. So this is what we call a social network. It shows you what a shark society would look like. So all of the squares and circles here represent a shark. And there's actually quite a lot of math has gone into this image you're seeing here. And basically those individuals that are clustered together are showing stronger associations, social associations with each other. They like spending time with each other. And you can see quite clearly that we have 4 different communities here, which are different colors. And rarely do you have individuals from one community associating with individuals from the other. So sharks can form social communities. Now you can see that there are a few individuals, like there's one blue individual and there's a red individual that do have connections with all the different communities. So these can be important individuals. Now, why is something like this important? Well, it lets us know how information can spread through this society. Think of it this way. If you were to spread a rumor to your friends, now, let's say you have a group of friends, you're all very close to each other, and so that rumor would spread amongst the group. Now, let's say there's another group of people who have their own friends, but you don't have any friends who connect the two groups. And that means that that rumor will not spread to that other group. But if you have one individual who happens to be friends with both groups, then that rumor can spread. Now, obviously, sharks aren't spreading rumors, but there's other forms of information, such as the location of prey that they can use. So that's one way we can do that. We're also trying to use some more novel techniques, for example, electronic tags, to directly measure how much time sharks spend with other sharks. So for example, we can tag sharks with transmitters that emit a special signal. And then we can tag other sharks with these new tags that we've been developing and testing that can detect those signals. So for example, you can see the 2 sharks with red tags here. Those tags are just emitting a signal. But the shark with yellow has what we call a business card tag. And that business card tag will record that it was close to the individuals that were tagged. So it's almost like that shark is carrying a business card from those other animals saying, hey, I've met you, and here's the proof that we've met and we've spent time with each other. So we've been trying to use these tools with white sharks, and I know everyone likes white sharks, so I'll use them as an example of an ongoing study, because white sharks may not seem to be that social. We all have the image of them being pretty solitary hunters. But is that true? There is actually evidence, and some colleagues of mine in Australia have recently provided evidence that white sharks like to hang out with certain other individual white sharks. So here you can see an example of the tag we use, and this is the business card tag we've put together. And so this measures a variety of things. It has the business card tag, which is recording the presence of other sharks. It has a video camera, so we can see what the shark is seeing. It has sensors that measures depth and acceleration, so we can see where the shark is in the water column, how active is it, how fast is it swimming, and so forth. Now, first of all, we have to get this on the white shark. So we can do this. This is work we've been doing in Guadalupe Island in Mexico, which is a well-known aggregation site for white sharks. And the way this works is we basically just clip this tag onto the dorsal fin of the white shark like that, just clips on the dorsal fin. And then about 4 or 5 days later, the whole thing will pop off and it will float to the surface and we can get that data back. So just to show you what some of the video footage looks like. So you're looking basically out the eyes of a white shark right now, and you can see the shark swimming side to side. You can see it sees a turtle, it goes up to the turtle. There's another turtle, so it's got some interest in the turtle. But here you'll see it's going to the shallows of the island, and it's patrolling really shallow, so close to the surface. You can see some of the reef, and you'll see a seal coming up into the corner, and you'll see it sees the seal. There it comes. Seal is very aware the shark's there. So the shark turns now, it's going after the seal, it's taking a closer look. Seal is maneuvering in, white shark is turning in. So it's obviously interested in the seal, but after a little bit, it gives up. Now, a seal is a pretty difficult prey item to get. It's not an easy prey to take over. It's agile, it's fast. And this is a very common occurrence, is that most of the time these predators fail. When they try to go and catch their prey, they fail. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about big sharks or lions or tigers or hyenas, the success rate is pretty low. So that's quite common. But then we can put this all together. We can start to see also how much time do white sharks spend with other white sharks? And so this is just a very, very sort of early example of the data we're finding, where we can start to build these networks of white sharks in the wild. And we can use the video to also try to understand what is the nature of these interactions. So here you can see a white shark sees another white shark, and it turns, it orients towards it, and it starts to follow it. So the relationships are subtle. It's not obvious why these animals are spending time with each other. Here you see a white shark sees another one in the surface waters, and that other white shark turns towards our white shark. You can just see our white shark's nose in the corner, and they start to spend time together. So we're starting to see that sharks, not just white sharks, sharks in general, do like to spend time with other individuals. They form these social associations. So the next question, of course, is why do they do it? What is the reason for that? And so I'm just going to list 3 possible reasons, and there are more. I just obviously would take a lot of time to go into all the potential reasons why social bonds may form between animals, or sharks specifically. And one could, of course, be related to hunting. Now, cooperative hunting is when you have individuals in the group that actually work together, specifically work together to catch prey. And it's very hard to prove that cooperative hunting actually takes place. As far as I know, there's only one good example for sharks, and that was based on some observations made of 7-gill sharks off Namibia in the 80s. So there's no video or pictures, so we just have to rely on these schematics or these cartoons that were drawn. But basically what we're seeing was that these 7-gills would form a circle around a seal, and then they wouldn't all charge in. They would just basically box in this animal, and they'd make the circle smaller and smaller and smaller. And when they had the seal completely contained, then one of them would charge in, and they would all charge in to feed. So this seemed to be cooperation in that the group was holding off actually trying to attack the seal until it was truly boxed in. So that may be cooperative hunting, but again, we have very few examples of this in the wild. But you don't have to just have complex cooperation for you to be able to hunt in a group and for it to increase the chance that you're going to catch some prey. So I'm going to show you some footage taken off of the French Polynesian island Fakarava in the channel. This is footage taken at night. This was shot by the filmmaker Laurent Balesta. It was part of a film called 700 Sharks that we shot a couple of years ago. And these are grey reef sharks. And what you'll see, let me just start the video, is that these sharks are chasing fish. And you'll see that when one shark sees the fish, it startles it. And now you see other sharks see that startled fish and go for it. Now, they're not working together. In fact, they're actually probably competing for fish. But just the fact that they're all going after animals increases the chance. Now, here you see them going after a moray eel. And there's no bait. I'll just say there's no bait here. This is actually a natural occurrence. This is how many sharks are in this channel at night. So it's absolute craziness to dive in there at night. But what you see is that these sharks may form a bond, because if one sees some prey, then another one may see the shark going for the prey and also go for it itself. Again, that doesn't mean they're cooperating, but it may be enough to lead to increased success for each individual, and therefore they spend time with each other. It may also be between different species. Now, this is some footage that I shot, which is why the footage doesn't look very good. But what I want you to see here is this individual right there is a white tip reef shark. Everyone else is a grey reef. And that white tip is able to go into the reef and chase out fish, which the other grey reefs are getting. Now, the white tip isn't working with the grey reef. It's just trying to get some fish, and the fish happen to escape and get out of the reef. From the standpoint of the grey reef sharks, they may not care, because it increases the chance that they get something to eat. They can't get into the corals like white tips can. So you may even see these social bonds form between sharks of different species. Now, another reason why you may see social groups in sharks is also that sharks have predators. We like to say that all sharks are at the top of the food chain, but that's not true. There's actually very few species that are truly at the top of the food chain, and they have predators as well. So they may form groups to increase the chance that they can see a predator approaching. So for example, here's again, some pictures taken off of French Polynesia, and this is going back to the schools of grey reef sharks. And you can see this picture of a big great hammerhead has come into the group and grabbed a grey reef shark. And just to say, that grey reef shark is probably 1.5 meters long. So it's not big by shark standards, but it's not a small animal either. So sharks can have predators too. And being in a group may reduce the chance that you're going to get eaten or killed. And then finally, we also have to consider mating, because sharks can have quite complex mating behaviors. And again, this is some footage I shot off of an island called Roca Partida, which is in the Revillagigedo Islands off of Mexico. And these are white-tip reef sharks, and they form what you can see here is obviously this chain of sharks. And I can't tell the sex of all these sharks, but more than likely the ones at the front are females, and then the ones behind are going to be males. And so you'll see there's quite often amongst shark mating where the females are going to be picky in terms of choosing, which male that they were allowed to mate with her. So you have these sort of competition between the males for females. Now, what's probably happening is the reason they're forming these chains is that the females putting out some chemical signal like pheromones, and the males are able to detect that, but we don't know for sure. So we have more and more footage of these sort of mating attempts or these pre-mating rituals, but we still don't fully understand the dynamics of what is actually taking place. Obviously, the problem with these is, we rely on either just having good luck and coming across this sort of mating behavior in the wild, or relying on divers who send us video footage. So again, we get more and more video recordings of mating behavior in sharks, but we still have a long way to go. So again, there's going to be other reasons as well as to why sharks may form social groups. I've just gone over 3 of them, and there are certainly other reasons. But I figured I would stop there, and happy to take questions.
Okay, so if you just stop sharing your screen, maybe. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. That was really interesting. We've got some good questions coming through. I'll just start with a general one, because a lot of the kids watching us are maybe interested in going in a career in marine biology or shark research. And I was wondering if you had, 1, how did you get into it? And 2, if you had any advice for them.
Yeah, so I similarly started off wanting to study sharks from a very, very young age. And that drove my career choice for doing my undergraduate and graduate degree and so forth. I would say things have changed a bit in terms of when I went through the process. And I think one of the most important pieces of advice is, if you're looking, and again, I'm only talking about a scientific career. There's many other ways you can have a career with sharks that isn't a scientific one, filming and documentary making and conservation and things like that. So I'm just talking about a purely scientific one. But don't specialize too early. You've got to have, especially nowadays, you have to have a very good background in mathematics and programming, computer skills, especially now. It was not as big a deal when I was coming up. Now it really is. So you've got to make sure you have all the basics before you start specializing in terms of, I just want to study sharks. So make sure you learn your math, learn how to write well. Those sorts of things are going to be very important.
Yeah, that's right. And nowadays, a lot of us spend a lot of time in the office as well, running data analyses and all this. So it's definitely true that things like maths are very important. And what's your favorite part of your job?
Well, I mean, my favorite part is, obviously I love doing the field work. Now, as you just said, I still spend 80% of my time in an office. So I don't want to give the impression that it's all diving at night with sharks, because that's actually the rare part. But obviously I love that part of things. I also, though, really like looking at data and getting the data back. And I actually really like writing scientific papers. To me, it's like writing a story and writing a little book. And so yeah, I enjoy that part. Maybe as I'm getting older, I like spending less time in the field and more time writing stories, but I do enjoy it.
And what's the coolest thing that you've done during your career?
I think the diving at night in the channel in Fakarava, where we had about 300 naturally hunting grey reef sharks, and then we actually had a big great hammerhead come through at night looking at the grey reef sharks, and that was I really have never seen anything like that in my life.
Yeah, I've seen some of Laurent's footage, and it's just stunning.
It's incredible. The footage they shot was just incredible.
Right, great. So we have some questions about your talk specifically. You were talking about the body arching in the sharks earlier. Are there any other indicators that you could use to identify what sort of mood a shark is in?
I mean, there are, and first of all, I'll say it's also possible to get a false impression. So for example, I mentioned that they drop their pectoral fins. Well, sharks also drop their pectoral fins when they turn. So just because you see the pectoral fins drop doesn't mean it's signaling to you.
Yeah.
So it really has to be, you know, that there's multiple components to it. One other metric that, you know, I obviously like to use is do you think that shark is showing you any sort of respect in terms of how far away is it from you? So sharks will tend to keep a certain distance from divers. If you see the same individual coming in closer and closer and closer, I start to, you know, at least consider, you know, what is that? Is that shark no longer respecting my boundaries? And that's always something that you want to be careful about.
Mm-hmm. Great. And you were talking about how sharks socialize when they're small, quite often in nurseries. So we had a question come through asking, do lemon sharks who socialize a lot when they are in nurseries, do they still socialize after they leave the nursery?
That's an excellent question, and actually a project that we're hoping to start looking at. So I don't have an answer for you, but what we believe is that the adults are much less social than the pups. So in that case, it may be that the level of sociality disappears as they get older.
Oh, okay. So are there any sharks out there that are strictly asocial, and apart from mating, obviously, but who never socialize between each other?
I would say, you know, the problem is we've only really started to have the methods and tools to identify social interactions recently. So for many species that we assume are not social, you know, who knows? So I don't want to say that they're not in any way, but there's certainly going to be species that seem to be much more solitary. Great hammerheads, for example, that you tend to see, with exceptions, often by themselves, and maybe a more solitary species, and other ones as well. So some of the open ocean ones, for example, again, you may expect makos, for example, to be less social than some of the reef ones that are going to be in larger groups.
And have you, I lost the question. You were talking about the tags that you use. Can you tell us a little bit more about the different types of tags that you use and what they're used for?
Yeah, so we have many different types of tags. Some tags just tell us about movement, so we can use satellite transmitters, acoustic transmitters, and those are tags that they'll tell us where the sharks are, where they have moved, where they're moving geographically. Other tags will tell us what they're doing. So the packages, for example, I was showing you, will measure the behavior of the animals in terms of acceleration or swim speed, as well as how deep they are and how warm the temperature is. And so those tags don't really tell us where they are, but they try and tell us what they're doing. And so the ideal scenario is we try to put those together. And we're also, you know, continuously trying to come up with new sensors that will identify new behaviors, such as tell us when they're eating, when are they mating, and so forth.
Very cool. Great. So coming back to how sharks socialize, we have a question here about how sharks socialize with other fish. Do we know of any social interactions with other species, either of sharks or of other animals in general?
Well, we do see some examples of what are called mutualistic interactions, which is when you see two animals that may spend time with each other because it benefits them both. So for example, you may see some jacks hanging out with sharks or hanging out with stingrays. We're seeing some evidence of different species of sharks that may spend time with each other. So my guess is there are other examples out there, and we're only just sort of perhaps starting to notice some of them.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to have a look through and see if we have a couple more questions.
Oh, I actually have one more that I forgot to mention. A good one is oceanic white-tip sharks and pilot whales. So it's actually well known that oceanic white-tip sharks will follow pods of pilot whales, and we're just not sure why.
Oh, interesting. Are there any theories as to why it might be?
Well, we think, you know, so the pilot whales, you know, they will go down very deep to forage, and either the sharks are following them because in you know, the pilot whales have echolocation, so they might be able to be better hunters in the dark water, or it could be something simpler that we've seen, that when the pilot whales come up to the surface, they tend to puke and throw up, and that the sharks actually can sometimes get the scraps.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that. That's really interesting. Okay. We have some questions about the body language of sharks, but you answered that earlier. Someone's asking about the body language in sharks that's parallel swimming. Any idea?
Parallel between individual sharks. I mean, that sort of parallel swimming is seen as some sort of social interaction between sharks. Now, what it means, I have no idea.
And do sharks' social behaviors change during pregnancy? So if sharks are getting into big groups, would that be different for females that are pregnant?
Well, you see aggregations often of sharks, female sharks, and in some cases those may be pregnant female sharks. Now, whether or not that's social, I don't know, because we also tend to see that pregnant female sharks will like to go into warmer waters because it actually reduces the amount of time they have to be pregnant. So it may just be that they find a good habitat and they just all happen to go to the good habitat rather than there being social. But it could also be that there is some form of social associations forming. There's some other advantage to being in a group rather than just finding an area that's warm.
Yeah, I studied reef sharks in the Seychelles for my master's, and found some interesting references about how female sharks tend to go into shallower areas to maybe avoid male sharks, especially if they're pregnant and don't want sharks attempting to mate with them again.
Yeah, and you'll often find separation between male and female shark populations. That you'll find females in one area and males in the other. And one reason could be that the females are avoiding males outside of the mating season.
Okay. Very good. Okay. This question has come up a few times for us. Do you know if sharks have ever if male sharks have ever attempted to mate with other male sharks, you know?
No, I've never heard of that. I will say that in the video I showed with the train, there was one moment where it looked like one of the sharks was biting the other shark's pectoral fin, which is a standard thing that male sharks will do to grab hold of the female before mating. And then as they turned, I realized they were both male. So I didn't see any actual mating, but that could be perhaps competition between males. I don't know, but I've never heard of a male trying to mate with a male.
Great. Okay, so I'll ask a couple of last ones and then we will say goodbye. Does the location or habitat of a shark change its social association? So depending on where they might live, does it change how social they might be?
That's a very good question, and I would say yes. So, for example, the groupings only occur. It may only occur in certain habitats. So we may see, for example, some sharks they'll all hang out as a group on the reef during the day, and then move offshore at night, either by themselves or in much smaller groups. So in that sense, yes, as the level of sociality changes based on whether they're on the reef or open ocean. And I'm sure there's many more examples.
And as you were saying earlier, sharks that live in the open ocean are probably less social than sharks that live on reefs.
Yeah, and you've got to think of it, is there a cost to being social? And if you are in open ocean, it's not easy to find other sharks. If you all live in the same spot in a reef, it's a lot easier to form a group than it is if you're open ocean.
Yeah. Okay, and last one, why might sharks be more social at a juvenile stage rather than when they're adults?
Well, I would say that's probably not always true, because we know there's some examples, I think some recent work with Port Jackson sharks in Australia, where the juveniles are not that social and the adults are. I may be wrong, but I think that was the result they found. But again, what is one difference that you may see between juvenile sharks and adults is that the risk of getting eaten by the sharks is higher when you're juvenile. So obviously you're not worried about things like mating, but you are more worried about getting eaten. So that may drive some of the sociality in the juvenile sharks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for answering all of our questions and for giving us the presentation, for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. We're sorry if we didn't get to your question. There's a lot of you posting questions, and so we can't get to all of them. But make sure you follow us on social media, and you can always post your questions there if you need. And I will just show you the website to just go over some of the resources that we have. So if you head over to the website, you might find some of the answers to the questions that you've actually been asking. So the website is very simple. It's sharksforkids.com, and there's plenty of resources for teachers and parents, lots of activities and fact sheets that you can look at. And for children, students, you can look through the colouring sheets, or once again, or lots of different crafts and really cool videos and everything that you might want to find out about sharks you can find on there. Okay, thank you so much, Yannis, and see you very soon.
My pleasure. Take care. Thank you.
Bye.